What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Cage Warriors commentator Brad Wharton to look ahead to Cage Warriors 162, which goes down in Rome this Saturday night. Brad, before we get into that card, I feel like we need a mini Cage Warriors State of the Union here, because this is my favourite time at Cage Warriors, because I feel like look, Cage Warriors is a promotion that builds and rebuilds and builds and rebuilds, like with a small roster of, and Graham Boylan was talking to the lads in the Old Triangle last week, and he basically said that they've had 2 years and in 2 years and in 2 years. And it's funny because if you look at what has happened in the divisions in the last year or so, it's crazy. Like at 125 we had the one with new champion, but we had the 135 champion coming down to fight at 125, so he vacated his title. The guy that won the title from him, Caelan Loughran, is gone to the UFC. At 145 that champion just moved to 155 and he could be gone to the UFC. The 155 champion just fought in Dana White Contender Series. The last two 170 champions are both in the UFC. Christian Leroy Duncan's gone to the UFC. Modestas Bukauskas has gone to the UFC. So literally the top of Cage Warriors has been absolutely wiped out and decimated, and then you can add in Oban Elliott and a few more as well. But the rebuild is starting, and we see the new prospects coming, and we see the new people who are going to emerge and maybe take those spots. It's such an exciting time, because like we could easily panic and go, oh Jesus, Cage Warriors have lost all their best fighters, but what Cage Warriors do is lose all their best fighters and then get more best fighters and build them to where they're going. And to look and see, and for you to be cage side watching those guys achieve that and build towards that, it must be exciting, Brad. And talk about that, but also if there's any names that you think these guys are going to be the next champions, these guys are the guys you need to look out for going forward, because there is a whole load of them piling up at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is going to sound really cheesy, but, you know, Cage Warriors really is the place where dreams come true. And, you know, getting to sit there, for example, in Rome earlier this year and see Caelan Loughran in that fight with Dylan Hazan, you know, those guys tore lumps out of each other. And when Caelan won that fight, you know, that whole, the brash persona of the Don, it just disappeared for a minute. It just melted away. And you saw what it meant to the person, Caelan Loughran, not the brash exterior, not the character. You saw what it meant to the man. And for me, being able to witness so many of those moments, you know, this next show will be my 10 years of being Cage Warriors play-by-play commentator, and to be able to witness those and tell those stories firsthand, it's just an incredible privilege. And none of it would be possible without the rest of the team and the work that goes into it, the matchmaking and the promotion from the media side of things, the team that organize the events and the logistics and the travel. It's, you know, we're a small team, but we do big things. We do big things for these guys' careers, and getting to see a guy like Morgan Charrier, who, you know, looked like he was going to get so close so many times. And then, you know, he loses to Vigenik, he loses to Paul Hughes, and then he gets that dream moment at UFC Paris. And all of a sudden, all the heartache, all the hard work, all the travel, all the sleepless nights, it's all worth it for everyone. But yeah, I mean, in terms of guys coming up, honestly, man, like throw a dart at something and you're going to hit one on the Cage Warriors roster right now. There's some incredible talent. And, you know, you only need to look back at Dublin last weekend. You know, you saw Jer Harris bring half the building behind him. You know, we were all super surprised to turn around and just see everyone on their feet so early in the card. You know, I predict big things for his future, wherever that may be. And, you know, even some of the guys who the results didn't go their way. I mean, I'm convinced Leon Hill's going to be a Cage Warriors champion within the next year or so. He's certainly got all the talent. Came up short on the night against another ridiculously talented, undefeated guy, Nyan Davies. You know, certainly no shame in that. Predict big things for both those guys. Look, the featherweight division is still an absolute murderer's row. There's guys coming through. There's guys on this Italian card. You know, we may not even get to touch on them today because it's a pretty big card. But, you know, there's a couple of undefeated prospects, 2-0, 3-0 on this card. And again, I predict in 18 months' time, you know, Graham Boylan talks about that life cycle. You're going to be looking at these guys on the main card and maybe even bothering the title picture. So it's fun times, as always.
As always, yeah, because it's When Graham said that last week, I was very intrigued by it. Like a guy like Solomon Simon, or a guy like Ger Harris, or like all the Team KF lads. Like even say the Team KF lads, it wasn't the greatest night for them. You know, they had a couple of losses and a couple of wins, but you can see with a couple more wins coming back, they're going to bounce back pretty quickly, get those opportunities and kind of get back in there. And I agree with you on Ger Harris. He went to another level, I feel like, that night. And sometimes you see that, like Paul Hughes is a great example of a guy who has probably jumped levels maybe 3 times in his career, or maybe even more. And Vucinic was a real jumping level, I think. And you know, he kind of carried that on, and you know, Vucinic is a top fighter, so getting him out of there is no disrespect to Key Higgins or anything, he's a very good fighter as well, but I think Hughes and Vucinic are both good enough to be in the UFC, and I think Vucinic will be back in that title mix pretty soon as well. Just a word on Hughes though, I suppose, before we move on to this week's card. Like, I suppose if you're Cage Warriors, you do at that stage you do get like a little bit greedy. You're like, give us one more, Paul, we'll have the title. And it's not even that greedy, because he calls out Hardwick at any opportunity he gets, and he wants that fight. I feel like if Cage Warriors are making a comeback to Dublin at the beginning of next year, maybe that's not on the cards. We saw, you know, Graham was talking about that, how hard it is to get venues and everything like that. That fight, would that be the biggest fight in Cage Warriors history? It has to be right up there if you're able to get Hughes and Hardwick. It
would certainly feel like it. I think in terms of the stakes for both guys, it would be one of the most meaningful fights in Cage Warriors history. You know, I think a loss to either man would be absolutely devastating. I mean, can you imagine if Paul Hughes got knocked out by George Hardwick? Where does he go then? Does he start to rebuild at 145? Does he carry on at 155? You know, it's tough. You know, it sets him back by, you know, potentially a couple of years in terms of the UFC dream. And you say the exact same thing about George. You know, drop that fight in the Contender Series. If Paul Hughes goes in there and stops him, you know, it's a long road back, and it really is a long road back. Look, you know, I think in a perfect world, from a Cage Warriors point of view, we'd love to put that fight on in Dublin. We'd love to put it on in Newcastle. We'd love to put it on in London. You know, I think that's, you know, that's a European headliner wherever you want to put it on. It'd be an absolutely huge fight. Whether it happens or not, I'm not sure. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they came for Paul Hughes after that performance. You know, look, not many people stand in front of Janka Hagens and get away with it. And Hughes not only got away with it, he beat him at his own game. Absolutely stunning performance. You know, I said to Paul afterwards that, you know, I just couldn't be happier for him. He's earned everything he's got. He deserves all the success that's coming to him. Selfishly, and I said this to people like Mason Jones and Reece McKee and countless others over the year, I'd love to see you stay in Cage Warriors and call you fights for another 5 years, but also very happy for whatever comes next for them. I
think it's interesting for a guy like Hughes as well, because, like, you know, people always say, they said it with Paddy and they said it with everyone on the way up. Oh, is it? Are they bigger than McGregor? Are they bigger than the guys that came? Like, at the time, McGregor wasn't McGregor. Like, in terms of being known, he was a very, very, very good fighter. But like, the hype around Paddy coming up was way bigger than the hype around Conor coming up, and the hype around Hughes now. And people look at his way, like, even you see guys like Luke Thomas and guys in the States talking about him. Like, they know him now. It's like Cage Warriors has become one of those things that, you know, you see guys coming through and you know they are legit, and you see the best of the best. And also, when a guy like Paul is, you know, maybe 18 months past where he should have gone to the UFC, and definitely a year past where he should have gone to the UFC, to see him still fighting in Cage Warriors, like, is a bit ridiculous, like, to be fair, because he should really be snapped up. And it's, do you know what, it's great to see, because we see those, you know, you could see him, especially for people in Ireland here, able to go to see him. It's not always the case, you know, with the UFC. There hasn't been an event back in a long time, but, you know, I can't wait to see what's next for him. But what's next for Cage Warriors is this Rome card this weekend. And again, there's lots of local talent, as you said, Brad, lots of kind of up and coming talent on this. And I think the last time we spoke about the Italian scene and the waves it's kind of making at the moment. And I think especially the French and Italian scene, you even see like the Spanish scene coming on as well. But I feel like a lot of, look, Cage Warriors leading the way, but a lot of the other promotions as well have gone into France, have gone into Italy over the last while. And, you know, despite what Kayla Loughran says, I suppose the ability, the level is rising and rising all the time. I know you spoke about it before, but especially maybe in France more than Italy, that there was different skill sets and a lot of people maybe coming over from judo and other sports. But it feels like, especially with the Italian scene, and especially with Rome, as we've seen over the last few events, that it's kind of going to the next level already, isn't it? A little bit like the Irish scene a few years ago, where a few people came through and everyone else is kind of being pulled up behind them. It's great to see, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's the MMA scene in Italy has historically not been particularly massive. Obviously, you had Venator a few years ago. You know, Uncle Frank putting on some crazy shows, just flying people in from all over the world, booking out hotels to watch the UFC in, and, you know, chucking all kinds of money around. But, you know, it didn't really, it wasn't really sustainable in the long term like that. And I know they tried to then focus on the sort of domestic thing a little bit more. But, you know, the real grassroots, it's kind of been, I don't want to say non-existent, but there's not been much of it. But, you know, with Cage Warriors being there a year now, I think I mentioned last time we spoke about the Italian scene, the Cage Warriors Academy system has been set up in Italy now. So there was a first show in September. There's going to be another one in November and another one in December. And they're all around the country. So they're giving different regions an opportunity to get involved and just give the amateurs the kind of platform that Cage Warriors have been giving the pros. And obviously that means a year down the line, 2 years down the line, these guys are going pro, but they've had a level of amateur fights that means they're more ready for that transition than the guys were, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So it's all an ongoing process. You know, there's a strong boxing and kickboxing background in Italy. You know, there's good jiu-jitsu gyms there as well. And we're seeing these guys cross over into MMA and putting it all together. You know, if you look at some of the guys, the more novice guys in the last few Italy cards, and they've got decent kickboxing experience. So they're not novice fighters. Which just in that stage of the scene where it's all developing. And, you know, the media is the same over there as well. You know, we've only been there a year and we're already seeing, you know, Italian MMA blogs popping up and putting more content out and more media applications to come to the show. So it's fantastic to be a part of that and for Cage Warriors to, you know, be invested in the grassroots scene over there.
Yeah, 100%. And we see even like in the main event here, we've guys that both have less than 10 fights into their career, and you know that's what I suppose Cage Warriors is all about. We've seen both of them fighting Cage Warriors too over the last while. They've actually fought before. I couldn't find the fight I was looking for a few years ago. It was back in, what year was it? 2021. So not that long ago. Dumitru was able to get the win here over Simone Patrizi, and this is a very intriguing fight. Like, you see Patrizi, and he's I think he's a green guy that you see the athletic ability on him. He's almost destined to go to the next level. We talked about Ger Harris earlier on, like early Ger Harris fights, or I saw Ger Harris as an amateur. He was a little bit like that as well. You knew because of the athletic ability he had, he could go to that next level. And he just looks like a guy who's going to grow into a very good fighter. He's a good boxer. He has good hands. And in Dumitru, on the other side of it, he almost looks not necessarily the opposite, but for this stage of his career, he looks like a guy who's, do you know, like the way they say Sean Strickland has sparred a lot. He feels like that. He's very comfortable in the transitions. Obviously, we saw the Cullen fight, and we saw the Leon Hill fight. It kind of shows it's ups and downs for a guy like that. It's a very interesting matchup, isn't it? It feels like Patrizi's going to need this one to stay in the feet. Dumitru is very good on the ground, very good ground and pound. But he's to me, he's like a striker who will wrestle. He wrestled against Hill, I suppose, after being forced into it in fights previous to that, and it didn't work out so well for him in the end. But it's an intriguing enough matchup, and especially with guys this young in their career, sometimes you don't know what they're actually going to produce. Like, someone might, they're a boxer one day, they turn into a wrestler the next day. It's an intriguing enough matchup, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I guess the thing to talk about here is the history that the guys have, right? So Dumitru got that head kick knockout on, I want to say, was it Venator? No, it was the Golden Cage.
Yeah, Golden Cage.
This is why you can't find it, because that Golden Cage show was a lockdown show in Italy, and it was on UFC Fight Pass. However, there was about 50 million fights on that card, and Fight Pass only took like the top 8. So if you go back into the archives, that fight was actually way down the card. So it does not exist on the internet. Well, legally at least, anyway. In fact, illegally as well. I've checked those places too.
I tried, yeah.
It's it's a tough one to track down. But yeah, I think not necessarily that the result was like a mega upset or anything, but the way it happened was a bit of a surprise. I think people were kind of expecting Patrizi to have Girlean's number on the feet and then bang, head kick. But it's just one of those things that happens in MMA. Obviously, for those guys, things have gone a little bit differently since. Girlean had that, what I am almost certain will be the Cage Warriors knockout of the year against Adam Cullen in Manchester earlier this year. He was a big underdog for that. But let's not forget, he won both rounds of that fight. Before the third, it wasn't like a fluke that came out of nowhere. And then, a huge knockout to start the third round. But that was his fight anyway. So a fantastic performance there. And, I already talked about how talented I feel Leon Hill is. So I don't think it's any shame at all for him to drop that fight. But Patrizi, on the other hand, is the guy on the winning streak, right? So he's on a 3-fight winning streak. He struggled against Emil Zafari in his Cage Warriors debut. I think he was probably down on the scorecard going into that third round. And as you said, his athleticism and his will to win really brought him back into the fight in that third round. And he got that fantastic stoppage to open up the main card. Patrizi didn't have to take this fight again. It was Patrizi who wanted it. He wants this blemish off his record. He could have moved forward against someone else who's on a winning streak in a fight that might do a little bit more for him in terms of the standings. But he wanted Girlean, and obviously Girlean is like, well, I've done it once, I can do it again. So I think all the ingredients are there for a real banger in the main event. And look, this card, I think more than others, we've seen some big title fights in Italy. We've obviously seen Shadchak and Martignoni. We saw Martignoni and Don Wooding. We've seen Dylan Hazan and Kayla Lutgren. There's no title fight on this one. And, the main event is an all-Italian affair. And we're really looking to showcase the Italian guys. And I'm expecting the fans to be making some noise for this all-Italian main event.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. It is one of those where one will emerge and probably be on the road, towards a title. That lightweight title, you don't know what's going to happen, with Hardwick and with Hughes and all of that. So, maybe it mightn't be next, but maybe it might be one more after that. Very interesting to see that one. From maybe that to the opposite end of it, two guys who have been around for a long time, Simone Dana against Albert Diaz. I've seen both of these lads fight in person over the last few years. Dana fought Brian Moore, Albert Diaz fought Richie Smullen. And I feel like Albert Diaz is one of these guys that... Just looking at his record here, like he fought Steve Emble in 2023. He fought in 2020 against Simone. He fought in 2019, and then it was 2017, 2016 before that. He's just a guy who doesn't fight enough. And if he fought more, I feel like he would be right, because he has all the skills. Like, he's such a good fighter. He's like flowy, switch stance, constantly throwing. A talented guy, but a tricky guy as well. And going in there against Adana, he reminds me a little bit of Matt Brown. He's kind of all knees and elbows and willing to throw and willing to fight, old school type of guy. This is a very high level fight, isn't it? And, one that could be, I feel like, an absolute war. Like the way Adana comes out there and he throws those big leg kicks and he puts it on you. And, he's one of these guys that, like, I feel like as long as he's in a scrap, he doesn't care if he wins or loses. And when you go in against a guy like Diaz, that can almost be a benefit, because Diaz is probably expecting to win this one, and against a guy who doesn't care, that could throw up anything. This might be my fight on this card. I really, really like this one, because I just think it's going to be a good scrap.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sean. You've got two guys who love to bring that smash mouth style, and never been in a fight they didn't enjoy. And that's all the ingredients you need, really. And I think that's, why it's in the position on the card that it is. If you look at Albert Diaz, like you say, consistency is key in this sport, right? So you want to be fighting regularly. You want to be getting, staying in that rhythm, constantly upping those skills, getting that cage time in. But I suppose the other way of looking at that is probably doesn't have the same kind of wear and tear on his body as someone who's been fighting 3 times a year for the last decade. And also in terms of figuring him out as an opponent, if he's not fought for 2 years before his last fight, what's he bringing? What's he going to bring that's new? What's he going to bring that's different? You've not got hours and hours and hours of recent footage on him, so he can be a bit of an enigma. And look, you only need to look at the he's been matched up twice in Cage Warriors, right? So he's going to fight Morgan Charrier on his debut. And that should tell you how highly Ian Dean thinks of him in terms of his capabilities. And then Steve Aimable, one of the most tenured and durable guys on the Cage Warriors roster for his second fight. And he comes in and beats Steve Aimable. And, that's a tough out for anyone. Steve's a hard fight for anyone in that division any day of the week. So, you've got a serious customer there. Diana, obviously, making his debut, but he's been in big fights before, as you say. Brian Moore, one of the top guys in Europe for many, many years, for my money. Always love seeing Brian fight. No shame in losing to a guy like that at all. He's gone and grabbed a couple of wins on the regional circuit, but make no mistake, this is a big step up now for him. The guys that he fought regionally, I think they were maybe get right fights just to get his confidence back in there. And at 28 years of age, it's kind of now or never for him. And I think this is a good fight, if he wants to make it, if he wants to be making his way towards the upper echelons of the division, you got to beat a guy like Alberth there. So I'm expecting a war. I'm expecting a very, very fun fight. I wouldn't put money in this one if you pointed a gun at my head, because I genuinely don't know.
It's tough as well. Like the other side of it, a guy like Diaz, you don't know whether he's been training and improving a lot, or you don't know whether he's not been training. And now, the way he's fought in the last two fights, you would suggest what you said is correct, because he's looked so good. But you just never know. He's probably working a job. He's probably not doing this with a guy like that. It's Joe McColgan was a little bit like that as well. But like Joe, at the end of it, Joe was like, I can't keep making these improvements. I kind of have to pick one side of it. Maybe DS is the same, but selfishly, I hope it's the MMA side, because I think he's such a talented guy. Speaking of Brian Moore, though, Luca Iovine is also on this card, who's fought Brian Moore. And I think this is an interesting matchup against Andrey Tyshchenko, because it's a guy with 8 fights into his career against the guy that's 28 fights into his career. And I feel like, again, you mentioned Ian Dean a second ago, this is kind of an Ian Dean special. You're putting a guy who they see with a lot of potential in there against a guy who's going to test him. And watching Tyshchenko, he's a very good wrestler. Like he's one of these guys as well who's not just a wrestler that takes you down and lays on top of you. Like, he tries to pass immediately almost, and sometimes it gets him into bad positions. It gets him reversed, but he's happy enough to be on the bottom too. He goes for the submissions. You just call him an attacking fighter. He attacks from everywhere. Maybe not the best striker in the world, although with a guy that young in his career, it's going to be improving and improving all the time. I'm going in there with Iovine, who's a straight up kickboxer, pressure guy with big leg kicks and that power right hand. It's a test, and the type of test a young guy like Tyshchenko, who's, as I said, only 8 fights into his career, needs, isn't it, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Tyshchenko can bang as well, right? He is a striker by trade, and he's training at a boxing squad in France. Of course, originally from Ukraine, he's relocated to France to train with the boxing squad, who are a very tenured MMA gym, and obviously known primarily for their striking. He can go on the feet, and I think, you look at Tyshchenko's last fight against Yoga Prabowo, who was almost a pure striker. That's why you were kind of seeing the takedowns in that fight. That was the kind of sensible route to victory for him. But he's got a lot to offer in all phases of the game. And, for a guy to, transport his life to a completely different part of the world in order to chase his dreams, you've got to admire that kind of character about him. He's quite clearly very serious about what he's doing. And, there's a bright future for him. He's got to beat guys like Luca, though. This is a guy who, as you say, 28 fights in. He's had some mixed results. Most of those mixed results have come, in his last sort of 10 fights or so. He had a very, very good start to his pro career. Obviously fought Nathaniel Wood on his Cage Warriors debut for the title. Got stopped, and he's kind of had some bad luck in Cage Warriors since. Right, he absolutely smashed Mike Ekendeo and then blasted him with an illegal knee when Ekendeo was pretty much out. And, it definitely wasn't intentional, because he was absolutely devastated after the fact. But, that was as clear a disqualification as you're going to see. And then you look at his other fight with Chris Edwards, and again, there was an illegal knee, and I believe a fence grab as well. He ended up having about 3 points taken. So he would have won that, but for the mistakes that he made. So, he's a guy who's perhaps a bit better than that record suggests. And, I guess the trouble with getting into Cage Warriors, fighting for the title, being on Fight Pass, having high profile fights is that the fights kind of stay high profile, and guys were sort of bringing him in to fight their guy. And he's had mixed results. I think that's fair to say. But, to fight back in Italy, he was very, very excited to be back on Cage Warriors and to be able to do so in his home nation as well. And look, I think if he can put a run together, there's no reason why this guy can't be, maybe the gatekeeper to the upper echelons of the division. And to steal the hype of a prospect like Tyshchenko, I know he'd love to do that. We know he's got the ability to finish, just needs to keep those tools pointed at the right areas, not pointed at guys' heads when they're on the ground. Keep those fingers out the fence, keep his cool, and he's got a lot to offer, I think.
Yeah, I remember a certain Brian Moore giving out about that as well. I'd say there was an incident in that fight as well, if the memory serves me right. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting one.
He's a passionate guy.
He's
a passionate guy. It happens to the best of us.
It happens to the best of us.
Sometimes you just need a guy in the head. These things happen in
the head was looking for the knee. These things do happen. We're going to need these things to happen in an MMA fight if an illegal knee or something happens in that one this weekend. Brad, I'm going to need that. I'm very looking forward to the women's strawweight bout as well, and I feel like there's been more and more women's fights on Cage Warriors cards recently, and that's really good as well, because the opportunities aren't always there for the women on the way up, and there's more and more women fighting now all the time, and it's great to see as well. So we've Micol Disegni here, who had an opportunity in the Contender Series, has taken a lot of tough fights down through the years, fighting another tough fighter against Samantha, Jean-Francois. Paddy Pimblett was on the commentaries for her last fight, and I was watching back to it, and he described her as seasoned, and I think that's a very good word to describe her, as she's very comfortable everywhere. Striker, pressure, she'll empty the tank, and sometimes the takedowns are her issue. But against Jean-Francois, I don't think that'll be the issue, because, God almighty, she is a talented striker, a real athlete. She's fought some really good people. She fought Zhang Weili a few years ago and all. She can get the fight to the ground as well, but, she's good ground and pound and good subs. And you see, she's, to me, one of those fighters, and I don't know if you agree or not, Brad, but you look at her record, and I think she's 7 submissions and 1 KO. But I think that's more of people taking her down, and she has to find a way to beat them there, rather than her wanting to actually to submit people. I think this is a fight where, and maybe one of the first fights for Samantha, where her opponent will actually face her straight up and fight her on the feet. And that could lead to something absolutely special here. Samantha's won last 4 in a row. She beat Valentino Scatizzi in one of those as well. I watched that fight a few times, obviously covering Scatizzi as well, and that was a very good finish there in that one. She's on a real run here and could potentially be a future star in Cage Warriors if she was able to get the win here. But that's by no means easy against Disegni, who's, as I say, a seasoned fighter, and will be a tough out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot going on here for Micol. She fought earlier this year, the last Rome event in July, I believe it was, and she had a really good fight, and she got dropped at the end of the first round. She got sat down hard, and I was very impressed to see her actually recover and be able to come out for the second round. And the rest of it was a really, really narrow fight. And for 2 of the judges, all the work she kind of done in that first round was negated by that big knockdown at the end. And she was maybe, we're talking 1 punch, and she'd have won that fight probably a bit more comfortably. So I think, it was a bit disappointing for her, to have that one end the way it did. She's 35 years old now. So, this is, potentially going to be the last run of her career. And I know she wants to be getting these wins in front of the Italian fans. She always brings a big crowd with her. And as you say, as a fighter, she's been in there with some really tough opponents. First person to hand Corey McKenna a loss. So we know she can beat these fighters of ability. We know she's got a lot to offer. And I think she's going to get everything she can handle from Samantha, as you said, someone who's just going to go and go and go. I was kind of wondering with this one, are we going to see Micol maybe look for the takedown just to mix things up a little bit? But she's going to really have to mind the P's and Q's on the ground, because as we've seen, that's where the vast majority of Samantha's wins are coming from. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess at whether this is going to be a stand-up fight or a ground fight, or whether we're going to see a bit of both. I really think everything is up in the air with this one. But what I do know is that Micol is very, very focused coming into this one. She seems to be, in a really kind of, a really good place mentally, which you might worry about considering the loss that she had last time. She seems very at peace with everything and just very focused on going out there and getting the win. And, she said, look, she wants to be the person that makes Cage Warriors bring the title back in her weight division. And in order to do that, she's going to have to get wins in impressive fashion in fights like this. And I think the crowd are going to be behind her. But yeah, no easy task ahead of her.
Indeed. There's two very interesting flyweight fights on this as well. Michelangelo Lupoli taking on Nicolas Leblond. Obviously, Lupoli, he's been in there with the who's who in Cage Warriors. Arnaby, Sam Creasey, Tanio Pagliariccio, and Nicolas Leblond. He had a great win last time out against Ryan Curtis, and maybe that's a bit of an underrated win because Ryan Curtis is probably an underrated fighter, and it was a very good win in Dublin last time. And then we've Tanio Pagliariccio, who I mentioned a second ago, fighting Sam Creasey. It just feels like there's almost a mini tournament going on here to see who's going to be the next in line. Creasey's been around for a long time. If you describe Creasey, he's an MMA fighter, isn't he? Like he's just an all-around guy. And Pagliariccio, watching him back, I was more impressed with him, I think, than I've ever been before. Look, his game is so good. Like, he's such a good jab, and his power when he connects. Very good at throwing combos, and he throws those wheel kicks out there as well. These two flyweight fights, very interesting in terms of the divisional talk, Brad, at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Tanio's the unicorn, right? The SBG fighter in Cage Warriors.
Brilliant. The world coming together. It's fantastic.
It's always good to see. Always good to see. Look, I thought Tanio was a bit unfortunate last time out. He obviously took an illegal knee, I believe it was, from Gerardo Funny, who we know is known for devastating power in his knee strikes, and couldn't come out for the third round, I believe it was, and nobody wanted to see the fight end like that, and I don't think that's a fair reflection of his ability and where he stands in the division, and I think he's going to get another big chance to prove himself against Sam Creasey, as we say. Sam's a multiple time title challenger, a former champion himself, a guy who's just been around, seen it all, done it all, good in every single area. And I think they're going to match up really well. I'm expecting this one to go the distance. I'm expecting to see a little bit of everything. And like you say, for the guy who gets the win here, I don't think we're holding that loss to Gerardo Fani against Pagliariccio. So it's a big step forward in the division for whoever gets the win here. And I'm perhaps even more intrigued by the Lupoli Leblond fight. Now, Michelangelo Lupoli, you look at the two guys that he got in Cage Warriors, and you have to bear in mind as well, when he debuted in Cage Warriors, he was 5-1, 5-2, perhaps. So, very, very novice in his career, just at that level where, obviously just beating Pagliariccio, so we kind of knew how good he was. But then to get Aaron Abbey for your first Cage Warriors fight is very impressive. And to get Sam Creasey for your second, also impressive when, you've got less than 10 fights on your ledger. And look, successful against Aaron Abbey, wasn't successful against Sam Creasey. That's, the biggest test he had in his career up to that point. And he certainly didn't look like he didn't belong in the cage with Creasey. It was certainly not a whitewashing by any stretch of the imagination. And then you take Nicolas Leblond. This is a guy I really, really like. And I'm sorry we've not seen so much of him on Cage Warriors. He debuted against Sam Creasey a few years ago in a very, very similar position himself. I think he was only 5-0, 5-1 maybe when he fought Sam Creasey back in the day. That huge knockout of Darren O'Gorman is one that still kind of keeps me awake at night sometimes. And then an absolute brawl with Luke Shanks in the flyweight tournament. And as you say, came back and got that bulldog choke, which, you don't see many of those in mixed martial arts these days. This guy's got a lot of skills. His striking is very, very technically proficient. He's a judo black belt. He's competed high level internationally at judo. So he's a threat wherever the fight goes. And again, it's flyweight. So you're getting 15 minutes more likely than not. Can't wait.
Indeed. There's a long undercard in with a lot of up-and-comers on it, Brad. If there anyone there that stands out, you let us know. We also have the Leon Aliu Alan Carlos fight. Did Alan Carlos not retire after his last fight, or am I gone mad? It feels like it. 40 years of age, back at it again against Leon Aliu, who I watched a couple of his fights there, and he's like, I've never seen a middleweight fight more like a heavyweight than Leon Aliu. He just throws punch after punch after punch. But there's that fight, but there's a lot of up-and-comers on this undercard as well, as you say, Brad, with records. You know, you're looking on here, there's a couple of guys 3-0 versus 3-0, 3-1 versus 4-1, even a couple of one or two guys, you know, making their debut or one fight into their career. Anyone there who stands out that maybe the fans might know now, but might know after Saturday night?
Oh, look, man. Let's give Alan Carlos and Leon Aliu a little shout out first, man. Like Alan Carlos has had his MMA retirement a couple of times now, I believe. But look, he's just game for a fight, and so's Leon Aliu, and this is going to be loads of fun. But yeah, you know, in terms of the other stuff on the card, I think Emanuele Tete. You know, you look back at his last fight, he's certainly one to keep an eye on. Dangerous finisher. You got Matteo Martignoni there as well, who's the brother of Michele Martignoni. He's making his Cage Warriors debut, and hearing nothing but good things out of the Aurora MMA gym about him. And I think we touched on it briefly before, the Valentino Riva taking on Giuseppe Mastrogiacomo, two guys undefeated, both 3-0, I believe. Hearing good things about both of them. That's going to be, you know, a real scrap for the locals early in the evening. But again, I think, you know, potentially the winner of that one is going to be one you're going to see slightly further up the card should we go back to Rome next year. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to look out for. I think, you know, like Graham said, with the guys on the old triangle a few weeks ago, you know, that Dublin card was very much kind of a rebuilding phase. And I think we're in a similar sort of situation with the Italian guys now. It's the building phase rather than the rebuilding phase. You know, we're going to be seeing guys who put in big performances on this card and get big wins on this card, going to be featuring more prominently next year. And
it's a very interesting time because, like, a lot of those championships are about to be filled up with new people. That's almost like, you know, when you get a date for the next fight, you that's when it starts. When these guys on the way up get that name and get that person to shoot for, like, well, I can beat that guy, and I feel like it just lifts them up, and we're going to see a lot of that in Cage Warriors over the next while, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all emerges. Brad, thank you very much.
Well, this is the thing, you know, we're like, we do a lot of events. There's a lot of opportunities, and things happen. I mean, you know, bit of breaking news today. Obviously, you know, we were planning to have Rhys McEwen versus Nathan Fletcher for the bantamweight title. Fletcher's injured, so Liam Gittins gets the shot. Fletcher's teammate, 4 wins in a row, but he's been quietly racking them up, and all of a sudden that opportunity's there. And Gittins is a guy who's been around for a long time, putting on exciting fights, and then his phone rings when the opportunity's there. And I think you're going to see guys on this card in Rome this weekend. They want to make that statement win. So all of a sudden, when the opportunity arises, they can stick their hand up and everyone will be like, hey, that's the guy who got the crazy knockout in Rome. I want to see him fight for the belt.
And it feels, a guy like Gittins as well, I feel like we've mentioned it before, and it's like, oh, geez, he's kind of crawling up there, and we haven't known, maybe this guy deserves an opportunity. Maybe this guy deserves a shot. And then he gets it, you know, and that's the type of thing that can very much happen. And looking forward to that fight, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Graham Boylan and yourself and Ian Dean have in store for us over the next few months. Brad, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everybody for tuning in to Cage Warriors this Saturday night on UFC Fight Pass. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and we'll see you all next time.